Jeff.
Good afternoon. Before I invite Mr. Nelson to offer his recommendations, I just wanted to make one point of clarification on the radar imagery point. I do note, and my friend pointed it out to me, that paragraph 178 does mention the use of radar or satellite imagery, and so my characterization of it being absent was not correct. And now, Mr. Nelson, if you can briefly list some recommendations, then we can.
Okay, I'll try to be brief, and what I'll do with this information is the budget numbers that I've talked about. I'll have that in a document, and also provide you with these recommendations in a little better format than it is right here in front of me. And I'll perhaps just read a sentence from each one to try, for time purposes, to say what they're about. And you know, this is a collection of recommendations that I've got from our collective management group, and I actually phoned a couple of offices in the region and said, if you were going to make recommendations, tell me what you'd hear. So I went right to the bottom of the organization and said, what can we do to make things better? And I must say that I'm very proud of the organization that I work for, and I would be giving this same information if I had 5 years left. There's some people say, well, you're gonna, who know I am, you're on your way out, you don't care what you say. I truly care what I say, and I would be saying the same thing if I had another 5 or 10 years. I'm really excited at the opportunity to be that we can present some of this stuff, and hopefully some of it will move us forward. So I'll just go into these and perhaps read them off. And first one, it should be mandatory that resource management and CNP meet to discuss fisheries and potential changes in fisheries long before being implemented. And I'm getting into the things like conditions of license that seem to pop up. We've got to be forced together, I guess, because we can't seem to be engaged. There needs to be an agreed to allocation in FSC fisheries, and that's a monster in that it's very difficult to achieve with all the groups, but it's something we got to start addressing. Catch monitoring in all fisheries must receive a higher degree of rigor and audit, and we've talked about that a little bit, including CNP. There should be a legal requirement for processors and cold storage facilities to have a detailed tracking system. We should be able to do a better job and put the focus on the cold storage facilities and the processors to track all the fish on their premises. Dual fishing, I've talked about that. Mortally wounded clause, elimination of that. Looking at perhaps more vessel monitoring systems on our commercial boats. Implementing special constable status for fishery officers and investigative body status. I raised those, I think, in the Habitat session. Restorative justice, more funding and expansion of the use of restorative community-based justice. There should be an independent non-DFO committee to review whatever recommendations come out annually. And that to me is one that I feel real strongly about. They should have full access to DFO staff and report directly to either the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans or the Minister. Just to try and make sure that 2 and 3 and 4 years from now, whatever recommendations come out of here, that there's some system to follow up and try and ensure that they keep them moving. A media liaison officer, I mentioned that one before. Consideration should be given to take line reporting a step further, and there was mentioned the word agency status. Is that something that would help move us forward in where we have to go in the future? I touched on in the past as well about our computer system, the radio system. Our current radio system, I understand, would require a huge amount of money, $11 million over 3 years to upgrade it. That's or rather than update it, like review and bring up some kind of a radio system or communication system that will be useful. Ensure line reporting doesn't go back. That's one of the biggest things that came out, most positive things that came out of the last review, and just emphasize, I can't overemphasize how important that's been. ensure that the regional director of CNP, in other words, a position I'm in, continues to be filled by people with extensive law enforcement background. In the past, that's not always been the case, and I think that's important. Other staff don't track their time. I mentioned that in the Habitat one. There's certainly probably aspects of the organization that could benefit from a time tracking system to ensure we're all working on the priorities we need to be. I think we should review the money we pay to Coast Guard for their services. We pay $5 million in this region, and it's $20 or $25 million nationally to provide Coast Guard services. Are we getting our value out of that? Rebuild the Aboriginal Guardian Program, and I've talked about that a little bit in the past. Considered a dedicated enforcement presence at the airport. This came from some of the officers working in the Lower Mainland. 10% of all air package transports out of the Vancouver airport are fish or fish products. Needs to be a regulation to ensure people crossing the border properly declare fish products. Right now, it's not there. Time delays in producing impact statements from resource management. That's a common factor in some of our delays in moving some of the violations through the system. Administrative support. There's many offices in the region that don't have administrative support, and we have fishery officers doing administrative work when we really would be better off having them out in the field. Recreation fishers should record all their salmon on their licenses. That was something I mentioned before. I think that's worthy of looking into. And a federal center of expertise for intelligence and informatics should be considered, along the lines with what Mr. Commissioner was talking about. The aerial surveillance program funding should not be reduced. And was there? I think those are the main ones. One somebody said, I don't know if it's a possibility, but ask the commissioner if he's interested in seeing what a patrol on the Fraser River might look like, and I'll throw that out there. It may or may not be feasible to do. Some of the policy gaps we have need to be addressed, and that's a national issue, and I think it's a capacity issue at the national level. And those are it. I know it's a long list, but it is from a lot of people with a lot of years who know a lot about this department. So I'll provide this to you in a little better format than it is now. But please understand, these are not. The explanations here may not be enough, and I don't know how, if there's more questions, we can how we'd address that. But at least you'll have a little bit more than I've given you right now.
And with that, Mr. Commissioner, in order for the budget document that you were referring to and requesting from Mr. Nelson to be presented in evidence tomorrow, I would like to seek leave to, while he's under cross-examination, to communicate with him just to the extent required to coordinate that document, if that's acceptable. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner. It is approximately 25 minutes to the hour. I have been afforded 50 minutes and probably will use that time. Gentlemen, my name is Don Rosenblum. I appear on behalf of Area D, Gillnet, and Area B, Sainer. A number of my questions actually feed on testimony that you have given both this morning and this afternoon, and I want to maybe go in reverse order and take some of your more recent testimony and seek a little bit of clarification. Mr. Nelson, moments ago you gave your wish list of recommendations that you thought should be considered by the Commission, and I was intrigued by about your third or fourth or fifth item, which I believe related to an independent committee to audit the progress that DFO might make with recommendations that come out of this inquiry. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Yes. Let's explore that just a little bit. I also am most concerned that after the investment of the Government of Canada at this inquiry and the investment of all of our energies, that there is accountability at the end of the day after the Commissioner does file his report. What do you envisage as the kind of committee that would be struck to review the progress that DFO might make year to year after the filing of Mr. Commissioner's report? And secondly, to what extent would you see this committee doing that audit? Would it be yearly or every 5 years or what?
I have given it some thought, and I think what would make it best if it's, I look back at the Williams Review, and the committee that was sat on that was representatives from all user groups. So for starters, I would say you want to have a First Nations representative, a commercial representative, a recreational fishing industry representative, and a non-government organization, and maybe a former DFO employee, and I'm not looking for work, but somebody outside the organization, those are off the top, and maybe somebody else to facilitate it. I'm not sure, but that was the concept that I was thinking of.
Would it also be advisable if one sweet-talked the Auditor General's office into overseeing the progress of this initiative once the Commissioner has delivered his report?
I guess that's an option. I throw the idea out as somebody, and having the ability to report either to somebody like SCOFO or the Minister, and the Auditor might be an option.
And would you not agree with me that if it was the Auditor General, it would be a document that was then filed in the House of Commons, in the Parliament of Canada, and thus the Government of Canada might feel a little more accountable for the review that the Auditor General might make?
I'm not entirely sure of the details, but if that's how the system does work, it's a possibility, yes.
Thank you.
And you'd mentioned annually. I think some type of an update annually, maybe not a detail, looking at it maybe every 3 years, something a little more detailed, because you don't want to create a big bureaucracy. You want it to be concise and just have some checks in the system.
Thank you very much. Feeding on other evidence you've given this afternoon, you gave very compelling testimony about the disparity in funding of CMP out in this region as compared to other regions in the context of salary funding, as I understood it. And of course, you referred to the various charts at the back of the PPR. Can you explain to us how this disparity came about? It seems so overt as you went through your list of how we measure up in terms of responsibility in CNP over here in Pacific region as opposed to these other areas, and yet we are receiving a very, very small percentage of the funds that are going, for example, to the Maritimes or to the Gulf. Can you explain how that came about?
Definitely not. I can offer some perhaps opinions on it, but I have no idea how it happened.
What are your opinions?
Well, the East Coast has been around fishing for 400 years. We've only been here a couple hundred years. Perhaps there's some relationship to it being the way it was back then. There were more officers in the communities. The East Coast had much bigger fishing industry years ago than it did now. I can't explain it, to be honest. I looked at it as many ways as I can. I think part of the explanation in this region might have come from when we went in 1993, moved away from doing everything and created fish managers and habitat staff. A lot of fisher officers moved over into those positions, and there was some reductions in numbers then. That might explain part of the gap, but I really couldn't offer any insight.
Well, you're a very passionate advocate for your division within DFO with CNP and your commitment to see yourselves fulfill the mandate under the Fisheries Act. Can you, presumably, and I have read a number of your documents, things that you have produced, paper that you produced, submissions you produced in respect to the need for funding or better funding for your division. Can you explain to us what reaction you are getting both from the regional headquarters and from the national headquarters when you set out the kind of analysis you did for us just before the break and the disparity?
I guess regionally, as I mentioned, both the previous regional director general and this one, the information I got back is you have to show how your organization will look without additional funding. That's the answer I get back regionally.
But that's no answer, is it?
Well, it's the only answer I get. You know, it's make do with what you have. That's really, if you want it in the simplest terms, that's what it means to me.
And what about when you've made your representations to the national headquarters?
The same response. Same response.
In other words, nobody has answered to you as to why this disparity exists?
Oh, the graph that I discussed here and the differences, that hasn't been. I only got that information when I started putting things together to answer some of these questions for this inquiry. I didn't have access to that comparative information before, so it's new to me, and it has been recognized. I know the Director General of CNP, I queried him on it, and he said, yes, there's people that look at that and wonder why there's so many resource managers in your region. And I go, what? That was one explanation was given to me. I didn't agree with that. I think I'm not for a minute suggesting there are too many resource managers in this region. It's much more complex fisheries, and they require more resource managers in this region. I also looked at that ratio of salary dollars for fishery officers to resource managers, and in the eastern regions there is one salary dollar in resource management for every $2.5 to $3.5 for fishery officers. So in other words, there's 2.5 to 3.5 times as many dollars spent on fishery officers as there is resource managers in other regions. In this region, it's 1-to-1. So it was another angle. You go, okay, why is that different? And the only answer I was given was maybe there's too many resource managers.
Is one explanation for this disparity an issue of political clout?
I can't answer that.
You won't answer that.
Well, I don't. I mean, if I knew, if I had some belief and some information that had been presented to me that says, yes, so and so says it's because politics this is happening, but I don't have that information.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask a question to Mr. Kulish. You spoke both this morning and briefly this afternoon in response to your counsel about the fact that you and your division believes that organized criminal activity is taking place here in the Pacific region. I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit without obviously breaching any intelligence information that shouldn't be out into the public domain. My question is this organized criminal activity within the First Nations community, or is this outside of the First Nations community and has infiltrated the First Nations community, or what?
Well, I certainly wouldn't target the First Nations community by itself. I would suggest that criminal activity has infiltrated all aspects where it comes to profit involving fish.
And you're speaking of organized criminal activity.
Well, as an example,
yes.
I can't speak specifics to as far as names, but I'll give you an example of a recent investigation that we participated in assisting the RCMP at the Vancouver airport, where crab was being shipped from the Vancouver airport to New York, and a number of shipments had gone through, and on the 10th shipment a container was damaged and marijuana was found concealed in amongst the crab. And subsequent investigation has indicated that over the 10 shipments, approximately $1 million worth of marijuana had been, it is suspected at this point, of being shipped. Given the nature of it, the details and so on, and some of the work that we've done with the RCMP, that's an example of an organized criminal activity. And we've found, again, with our liaisons with the RCMP and the intelligence services and so on, that many of the people they're dealing with for various types of criminal activities are involved in fish. Commercial fishing activity on the West Coast, we have 29,000 kilometers of coastline in British Columbia. And you've heard how much of it is now exposed to virtually nobody being out there from a law enforcement perspective, including ourselves, because of cutbacks. There's lots of examples of those types of things that have gone on, and our associations with the RCMP, with the U.S. authorities, and others. We know what's going on. We're getting the information. It's simply a matter of being able to target, when it comes to illegal fish, the right people, and using intelligence. And I go back to that as our primary function and use of information to target those people.
And when it comes to organized crime, the investigations are usually very costly, aren't they?
Yes, we also employ the use of undercover officers that report through to me and are involved in intelligence probe activity, where we're trying to determine the nature of activity and information come. And when we engage in those types of activities, we get a substantial amounts of information that show us that there are communities, if you would say, of activity out there involving criminal actions. Another recent one was an internet sales investigation that led to a substantial amount of information regarding criminality involving not only fish, but, as an example, a substantial quantity of illegal cigarettes were seized that came across at Akwesasne, which now employed the RCMP, their immigration section through CBSA, the Custom and Excise people. These are criminal organizations that are involved.
Thank you. There's been much spoken today about FSC fishery, and I don't intend to go into that. Some of my colleagues will be focusing some of their questions in respect to FSC issues and possible illegality. I do want to focus, though, in one aspect of your testimony, and that related to the traceability of a fish stock that you have found in these fish plants. Who own these fish plants? And obviously I'm not asking for names. I gather this is, for the most part, not First Nation proprietors. Is that correct?
No, these are commercial establishments.
Right. And you have said very clearly that for these plants to possess even FSC fish is not obviously a criminal act. My question to you is, before it would only become criminal at the point that you were able to establish that stock of FSC fish was sold in the marketplace. Is that fair to say?
When sale took place, that's correct.
Sale. I'm fascinated to understand why you could not impose regulations that ensured that these commercial establishments that are licensed establishments why they could not be compelled to provide audit of every fish that goes through that plant and where it ends up.
Well, I think we're looking at that as a provincial matter. It's not a federal government matter. That the jurisdiction, once the fish have been harvested legally and so on, become possession of the fisher and or subsequent, becomes under the jurisdiction of the provincial fisheries legislation.
Yes.
I think that we're clearly looking and working with the province now and working internally to try to determine if there are subsequent regulations that can be applied or license conditions, but understanding that many of these places simply provide a service. They don't take ownership of the fish. It's not their fish. They're providing a service, which is storage. So their actual responsibility to account for those fish, for the actual numbers, it's not theirs. It's the owner of the fish. And the shell games that are played, the numbers of companies that are created by these fish, by people who own this fish, and you saw that long list by the audit, and the manipulation of fish and movement and so on becomes very complicated. There are basic regulations that state that an individual who, either whether he's a buyer or a seller of fish, must provide documentation and when and so on. Compliance with that is very poor. The province, whose responsibility it is to regulate that, simply doesn't have the resources. They're worse than we are when it comes down to that. We encounter that, we work with them as much as we can, but at the end of the day, it's a very complicated process.
But if this matter of what I'll call audit is in the hands of the provincial government because of their jurisdiction, if there were recommendations from this commission that called upon better cooperation between the two levels of government with possibly the consideration of new regulations, might that not make your job much easier?
Absolutely.
In the PPR, there is a reference, Mr. Nelson, to prioritizing operational, what I'll call operational prioritizing within the Pacific region. And I'm referring in particular to page 27 of the PPR, where it sets out, actually 27 going on to page 28, what I believe was the Pacific region's prioritizing for the year 2010-2011, at the bottom of page 27, the top of 28. I note that the highest priority was aquaculture. Am I not correct? Number one?
I don't. These aren't in priority. They're in how they're where they located on the heat map. In other words, which one is going to present us the most challenges to achieve for this coming year?
I see.
Yeah.
And but I want to stick on the aquaculture for a moment.
Yep.
Your government has already taken over jurisdiction of that field. Is that
Yes.
not correct?
Yes.
And as a result of inheriting that area of jurisdiction, have you already, you meaning DFO, already done all the hirings in terms of CNP?
Within CNP, we have got everyone. We have 12. We have 12 positions, and we have done the hiring for those.
And you have done the hiring as of January the 1 this year, approximately?
No, we didn't have the people in place. That's why this one rated so high on the risk scale, is because we knew we wouldn't have people in place right away when we took it over. So I think right now we are, there might still be 1 or 2 non-fishery officer positions to fill, and some people maybe haven't completed their relocation. Of the 12 we had hired, I believe it's 7 are fishery officers.
And in respect to those new hires, has money been allocated for those salaries that does not in any way compromise your budget for the rest of CNP?
That's right. The budget numbers that we put together here were put together before and without the aquaculture funding. The aquaculture is a separate stream of funding for 50 or 55 positions for all of DFO, of which CNP received 12.
And you are confident, even though you're going off into the sunset in terms of retirement, that in the upcoming years, the funding of this initiative of taking over this jurisdiction will not undermine the overall funding of your division of CNP?
As good a confidence as you can have. I'm told it's A-based funding, and it's not like the PIC fee program where it was expected to sunset. That's what I've been told.
Thank you very much. I want to turn to the dragnet fishery of the high seas for a moment. And we see in the PPR, and I can refer you to it if need be, that the position of Treasury Board is that DFO is maintaining strong monitoring, control, and surveillance presence in the Northeast Pacific through Operation DriftNet. My question to you is this. We also read that the Aurora surveillance program has been severely cut back, correct?
Yes.
How does all this jive? Firstly, that there is a reduction in aerial surveillance. And my second question is going to be, when there is aerial surveillance and they determine that there is something that appears might be illegal in activity, what capacity do you have to do anything about it once a report is given to your office?
Okay, a couple of items. The amount of flying time is been reduced. The radar sat is another tool to help provide some of the information to focus our efforts
Yes.
on the reduction in hours, and also looking into the prospect of being able to land in Japan. If we are able to achieve that, you could probably deliver, depending what the number gets down to. Like, I don't know somewhere in the PPR it talks about a number of 40 hours versus 120 hours. I don't know if you can achieve that, the same goal, but that's the idea, is with the use of radar sat and the ability to land in Japan, that will increase our capacity, and also working with the other signatories to the North Pacific and Admiral's Fish Commission groups, they have patrol capacities as well. Now, when vessels of interest are identified, they try and determine the country of origin, and will and report it to those countries. Countries like China and Russia and the U.S. Have more vessel capacity out there to deal with the violators, and they will often be the ones that do the apprehensions.
And we're speaking of interception, aren't we?
Yes.
We don't have any capacity, do we?
I guess if our D&D ships were used, they might be able to, but I'm not aware of us ever doing that.
Yes. So our contribution to the international community in terms of enforcement of international arrangements is simply surveillance and passing that information on. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. This may be an appropriate time for the break. Thank you.
Hearing is now adjourned for the day, and we'll resume at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Oh, that went fast.